Good afternoon, Valeriy Viktorovich. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, dear viewers, audio listeners, and comrades in the studio. Today is July 1st, 2024.
И в первом вопросе Наталья просит прокомментировать вас звонок 25 июня.
In the first question, Natalia asks you to comment on the recent call on June 25th by U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin to Russian Defense Minister Belousov, as well as the subsequent statement from a Pentagon representative indicating that the USA has no plans to deploy American troops to Ukraine at present or in the future. Additionally, she inquires about an incident that occurred today, the shelling of the territory of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Another user, with the nickname Velez, raises concerns about the attack on peaceful vacationers at Sevastopol beaches and the subsequent toothless warning from the Russian Ministry of Defense. The flights of U.S. strategic drones over the Black Sea increase the probability of incidents with the aircraft of the Russian aerospace forces, which increases the risk of direct confrontation between the alliance and Russia. And there was also a response directly from Belousov. Belousov has instructed the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces to make proposals for a swift response to U.S. drone provocations over the Black Sea waters. Valeriy Viktorovich, does all this imply a retreat with our tails between our legs and a direct surrender of our positions? Are the pro-American lackeys in the Ministry of Defense guaranteeing a lack of retaliation and inviting a nuclear strike on Russia? No. The facts stated in the questions are correct, but the interpretation is incorrect. It is primarily linked to a shallow comprehension of governing complex social supersystems. If we look at the situation in complexity, it appears entirely different. The noted fact about the Minister of Defense's instruction to the General Staff is significant, but the underlying reasons are entirely different. Before delving into the reasons for the fact of the instruction, it is important to recall the attack on the beach in Sevastopol carried out by American ATACMS weapons. On this occasion, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov stated this week that there is no doubt about U.S. involvement in the terrorist attack in Sevastopol. There is no doubt about it, because the missiles are American, launched by Americans, and target acquisition and further control are conducted by the American satellite network, reconnaissance aircraft, and drones. The responsibility lies entirely with the Americans. However, it is not enough to simply say, yes, we know that the Americans did it. Next comes the question, and what will be our response to this act by the Americans? If we acknowledge that the Americans are responsible for this and Russia does not react to the actions of the United States, we send an invitation. Yes, Master, you can continue to do as you please. We know that it is your actions, and we are content that you are punishing us. It's our fault, so continue.
Получают какую-то реакцию от России, которая Соединенным Штатам наносит как минимум репутационный ущерб, а по нормальному, то есть...
Another reaction is if Russia reacts in a manner that at least causes reputational damage to the United States or, ideally, creates conditions that prevent the United States from further eliminating our peaceful population. Yes, they are fighting against Russia. However, the United States has historically waged wars primarily against peaceful populations. The United States Army has never, throughout the history of the United States, achieved any military victories in the traditional sense whatsoever.
Все, чего они добивались за счет того, что они уничтожали мирное население, или же они в условиях абсолютного
All their successes have only come from the extermination of civilians or the defeat of weaker opponents under conditions of overwhelming military superiority, under conditions of absolute superiority. No wonder this mentality is reflected in Star Wars, where the super warriors, Jedis, engage in battle and suddenly reinforcements arrive for their opponents, and they say, it's a standoff. We should retreat since we may not win. It's best to engage in battle only when the enemy is clearly weaker. Let's go. What did Americans do during World War II? They bombed cities, causing suffering to only the civilian population of Germany. How did they fight against Japan during World War II? They resorted to bombing peaceful cities, hoping to break the enemy, but it did not work. It was only the entry of the Soviet Union into the war against Japan that prevented the United States from being drawn into a war with Japan for many, many years. The United States had realized it could not defeat Japan alone. They had entered the war with the belief that they could defeat the weaker enemy, but it proved challenging. Therefore, they had been willing to make any concessions to involve the Soviet Union in the war against Japan. The United States had understood that achieving victory would be impossible, despite setting deadlines for their victory within 1, 2, or 3 years. The United States has always destroyed civilians first. This was the case in the Korean War, and this was the case in the Vietnam War, where they even used toxic substances that still cause mutations in newborn children. The United States hasn't changed a bit. How did they start conquering land from the Indians in America, and how did they destroy them? They gave out blankets infected with smallpox, destroying the tribes first, particularly women and children. They would distract the Indian warriors and, while the warriors were occupied, then attack and murder the women and children. By murdering women and children, they were depriving the entire tribe of a future. It was doomed to eventual extinction. They were willing to wait for this outcome at times. This policy is currently being manifested by the United States in attacks on the civilian population in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and in our Belgorod, Kursk, Voronezh, and Bryansk regions. They are constantly deliberately striking at civilian objects and the civilian population. This is the United States tactic for waging war. The United States landed in Europe with great pomp and advanced by facing minor units of the Wehrmacht, which they always suppressed with great force. However, as soon as the Wehrmacht was able to concentrate its forces and the Americans were deprived of air support, the Volkssturm and Hitler Youth Division struck the Americans and British so hard that they were in distress, prompting Roosevelt and Churchill to cry out, "Help, Stalin, please, otherwise, we will be pushed into the Atlantic Ocean now." These brave warriors can only fight and kill civilians. This is the nature of the American military, as evidenced by their actions in Afghanistan. WikiLeaks, led by Assange, who was recently released from custody, exposed a large amount of material on how Americans conduct warfare, including incidents where they shoot weddings, peaceful civilians, and commit other atrocities, as well as revealing how cowardly they can be in real combat.
Так вот, единственным адекватным ответом на то, что мы знаем, вернее, нашей реакцией, адекватной реакцией на то, что мы знаем, что это сделали.
The only adequate reaction to the fact that we know the Americans were responsible for striking the Sevastopol beach is to prevent the United States from carrying out such strikes in the future.
А это означает, что никаких беспилотников и разведывательных самолетов в акватории Черного моря.
This implies that there should be no drones or reconnaissance aircraft in the Black Sea water area whatsoever.
И вот Остин ни с того ни с сего позвонил.
Out of the blue, Austin called Belousov. The Secretary of Defense of the United States called the Minister of Defense of Russia. What is the reason?
У нас тут произошел такой определенный ажиотаж. Значит, что 24 числа в Черном море некая неприятность произошла.
We have experienced a certain agitation here because on June 24th, in the Black Sea, some trouble occurred with a United States drone, which allegedly prompted Austin to call Belousov.
Я не знаю, было там что-то, не было там что-то, но возникает вопрос.
I am unsure if something actually occurred there or not, but the question arises, if we did indeed hit the Americans on their tail, why was this not publicly reported? I emphasize, if that is the case.
А если об этом не сообщено публично, то это демонстрирует желание высших управленческих кругов.
If this incident was not publicly reported, it shows the willingness of senior government circles in Russia, including in the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff, to conceal the damage done to the United States image. They are already silent about the Houthis and the damage to the aircraft carrier Dwight Eisenhower. It seems to be swept under the rug. However, in this case, it is Russia, and Russia should respond adequately to the aggression of the United States, to the killing of our civilians, including children on the beach. The strike was deliberately carried out against the beach. If all those missiles had reached the target, what would have been on the beaches?
То есть здесь абсолютная забота о том, что в мире все знали. Американцы нанесли удар по пляжу. В России убили мирных людей.
Therefore, there is an absolute care here that everyone in the world should know that the Americans attacked a beach in Russia, killing and injuring civilians, and Russia accepted it without even a hint of dissatisfaction with the actions of the master.
Но мы же видим, вся эскалация в мире происходит ровно потому, что все, вот уже весь политический истеблишмент, самый крутой, и в Европе, и в Америке говорят, мы можем наносить по России ядерный удар. Россия не посмеет.
We can see that all the escalation in the world is occurring exactly because the entire highest political establishment in Europe and America is saying, we can launch a nuclear strike on Russia, and Russia will not dare to retaliate against us. Look, they are slaves who wish to lick our asses, and they are doing it. For the Rus Zion elite, Russia's interests mean nothing. Their goal is to curry favor with us. They are willing to pay for all this with Russian resources. They are willing to help us destroy Russians, destroy the Russian economy. We see this. We see this in the actions of the central bank. We see this in the behavior of the general staff. They talk about it openly.
Это в случае, если там действительно был такой случай
If there was indeed an incident involving an American drone, it implies that the aircraft was not operating autonomously but was sent by a high-ranking official who authorized its actions. The fact that the Rus Zion elites are trying to conceal this incident raises questions about the motives behind it. Remember when the American drone was shot down, they exclaimed, "Oh, by accident. Master, we're sorry." Well, there are Russian patriots here who stand for this Roshka. We ourselves are all Western, all yours, Europeans. We don't need this Roshka. This was the excuse given when they brought down that drone, wasn't it? Now we see the same. At the highest government level, this information was suppressed precisely to avoid causing pain to the United States. How so? Does Russia behave like a sovereign country? Will Russia respond? No, she won't respond. We will crush, we will cut off anyone's oxygen who tries to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike if the United States initiates a nuclear strike on Russia. These bastards fail to comprehend that they too will perish in the nuclear inferno, yet their eagerness to gain favor with the Americans outweighs this realization. In the case of no downing of an American drone occurring, this misinformation was deliberately spread to somehow reassure the patriotic public, who are resentful and asking, why don't we react? Why can those drones fly freely and direct missiles without any interference, destroying civilians and damaging our objects? They are even hitting military objects. What authority do they have to do this? They act as the world police, imposing their will on us. Why should we consider their wishes when governing our country? If they attack us, it's a declaration of war, and we should respond adequately. We can respond in such a way that the Americans will eat it and crawl away without sparking a third world nuclear war. History has shown that the Americans have crawled away victoriously from Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places when faced with strong resistance. Whenever the Americans get a hit on their tail somewhere, they retreat, and then they spin this fleeing as a victory. Their media support this narrative. However, the call was made. In the event that this incident did indeed take place, the purpose of the call is to address the issue and prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Therefore, it is important to speak directly with Belousov, ask specific questions to elicit certain responses, and observe his reactions. There are numerous questions that could have been asked. If the incident did not occur, the call was still necessary. It was important to assess the new Minister of Defense and how he would defend Russia. What if he is up to something? Naturally, no one will give away such plans, but the Minister of Defense's way of communicating will mean a lot. Let me remind you that at a certain stage during the special military operation for demilitarization and denazification, Austin contacted Shoigu in a similar manner, and Shoigu put this brazen person in his place. The West had a setback. We need to crawl away. What is happening? We are about to be vanquished, and that's it. Our Pax Americana will collapse. But, in order for Pax Americana not to collapse, Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov, as he himself reported to the media, initiated a call to his, so to speak, colleague, vis-a-vis, Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, Milley, to assure that no harm would come to the United States, regardless of their actions against Russia. Moreover, Gerasimov publicly shared this information with the media. And, as we can see, the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces strictly adheres to this reassurance. It does not cause any damage to the United States. We are constantly fed lies that some Nova Poshta is delivering military supplies to the front in mail trucks, and therefore it is impossible to inflict any damage on the enemy's rear groupings in Ukraine. But this week, once again, Russian frontline reconnaissance officers found a Ukrainian military echelon unloading site near the line of combat contact and destroyed it. The military supplies are being delivered in echelons. And yet, various morons in Russia continue to hang noodles on our ears, hoping that people are imbeciles and do not know that the front cannot be supported by trucks. There must be echelons. And there are echelons, and when frontline reconnaissance discovers them, they are regularly destroyed. But this only happens when the frontline intelligence discovers them. The General Staff has a space group. The General Staff has aviation reconnaissance. Our reconnaissance planes thoroughly scan the entire territory of Ukraine, capturing neighboring countries in Eastern Europe, making everything completely visible. Why isn't this information being brought to the front lines? At the front lines, there are weapons of destruction that could potentially wreak havoc on echelons at various marshalling stations and disrupt logistics in the close rear. Instead, we destroy bridges that could be used by ourselves. They will be blown up by Ukro-Nazis during the retreat anyway. But, by disrupting their logistics in the rear, we could have forced them to retreat rather than continue fighting on these front lines. Instead, we let them fight so that the killing of the Russian people could continue, so that the Ukrainian population could be eliminated, and so that there are no specialists left. When we will be looking for railway workers, they have perished on the front because the so-called territorial centers for conscription are mobilizing people en masse. When we will be looking for plumbers, there won't be any available. There will be no teachers at the universities. There won't be anyone left. All are being grabbed and sent to the front. The population is being decimated to leave behind a wild field and to leave Russia with no one. Moreover, it is the loyal to Russia population that is being decimated, leaving all the Banderian scum safe and sound. The General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces is directly collaborating in organizing this state of affairs.
Министерство обороны делает заявление, согласно которому Генеральному штабу предписано выработать план.
Now, the Ministry of Defense has issued a statement directing the General Staff to develop proposals for a rapid response to the flights of foreign reconnaissance aircraft and drones.
Публичное поле выносится распоряжение начальнику Генерального штаба.
The Chief of the General Staff has been publicly tasked with preparing these proposals to prevent potential strikes on Russian territory by Americans in the future. It is crucial.
То есть публично начальнику Генерального штаба поставлено на вид, всем предъявлено, что начальник Генерального штаба не справляется со своей задачей.
It was publicly pointed out to the Chief of the General Staff that he has not been fulfilling his duties and failing to do what he should have done. He has been publicly exposed, which is proposing measures that would make strikes on Russian territory by American means of destruction impossible. Present such a proposal. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs may also be involved where necessary, and political decisions may be made at the legislative or presidential level where necessary. But there must be something. Gerasimov should have taken these actions at the start of the special military operation for demilitarization and denazification, but he did not. He has been avoiding his official responsibilities and failing to uphold his oath to Russia. Instead, he is upholding his oath to the United States, which appointed him as Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. This is a Vlasovite, unfinished, and this fact has been directly pointed out to him. And now we come back to this moment, where our foreign minister said, yes, it was the United States that carried out the strike on Sevastopol.
Если Генеральный штаб просаботирует, впрямую не выполнит распоряжение, которое он получил от Министерства обороны, Герасимов напрямую заявит о том, что он изменник Родины, власовец, который служит иностранным.
And now, if the General Staff fails to carry out the order from the Ministry of Defense, Gerasimov will publicly denounce himself as a traitor to the motherland, a Vlasovite, serving a foreign state, prioritizing the interests of the foreign state over the security of Russia, allowing attacks on Russian territory and civilians, including children. I've got a question. Don't you think Gerasimov opens a bottle of champagne every time he hears about another Russian child being killed by American weapons? Isn't he happy and jumping with joy that he has served the Americans so well? The second task is to prevent the if scenario from occurring or any potential sabotage by him. We want this issue to be resolved and the very possibility of the United States continuing to strike Russia to be finally eliminated. Drones should not fly over the Black Sea, and reconnaissance aircraft from the United States or other NATO countries should not be present there. They simply should not be there. There are numerous examples of how this can be achieved. The Americans have demonstrated this in the past, with Yugoslavia and Libya, declaring, "Listen up everyone, and no-fly zone is in effect, and it will be your problem if you violate it." This statement was issued by our Ministry of Defense, and you have read it.
Продолжение полетов этой авиации ведет к тому, что увеличивает риск прямой конфронтации альянса НАТО, имеется в виду, с Российской Федерацией, и что ответственность.
The continued flights of Western aircraft increase the risk of direct confrontation between the alliance, referring to NATO, and the Russian Federation. The responsibility for this lies with the United States and NATO countries. We have made our position clear. The implementation of this decision now rests solely with our General Staff. So, the conversation occurred.
А на следующий день американский самолет-разведчик в сопровождении 4 истребителей нагло.
The following day, an American reconnaissance plane, accompanied by 4 fighters, boldly entered the airspace over the Black Sea. All right, it had not even been a day yet, so it was hard to say at the time whether the Americans decided to ignore the words of the Ministry of Defense or not, whether the U.S. had a planned flight or something else. However, the next day, the Pentagon announced that the United States will continue to fly in international waters where the laws allow, meaning wherever the United States chooses to fly, as it always does. The laws refer to American law, as demonstrated by the situation with Assange, indicating that American jurisdiction extends worldwide. Whatever the Americans desire becomes law for everyone. And we have a question. What will follow? The measure of bloodiness in upcoming events hinges on the actions taken.
Если Генеральный штаб выполнит свою прямую обязанность,
if the General Staff carries out its direct duty and eliminates any possibility of reconnaissance planes or unmanned aircraft from the United States and other NATO countries flying in the Black Sea area, then there will be significantly less bloodiness. That's it. A political stance was properly proclaimed, and it aligns with precedents demonstrated by the United States towards Yugoslavia in 1999 and Libya in 2011, among others. The next step is military action. any drone must be taken down as soon as it appears. If a reconnaissance plane from any NATO country, whether it be the United States, France, Sweden, or any other, enters the area, it must be shot down. The responsibility lies with those countries. The political decision has been made. Much now depends on the way the General Staff will be implementing this political decision. A lot depends on it. What was it in the question? Retreat with our tails between our legs. Now, this is not a retreat with our tails between our legs. Does this response imply a retreat with our tails between our legs and a direct surrender of our positions? No. This response does not imply a retreat with our tails between our legs and a direct surrender of our positions. This is a very serious political statement that allows Russia to close the entire airspace over the Black Sea to military aircraft of any type from any country in the world, except those located in the region. Essentially, only Turkey and Romania should have permission to fly over the Black Sea and no one else whatsoever. I don't take Bulgaria into account at all. Any attempts to circumvent this by using an American drone launching from, say, Incirlik Air Base will not succeed, will simply not succeed. We have to shoot it down. The Ministry of Defense and the highest political leadership of Russia, represented by the Gosudar of Russia, have taken all necessary steps and pointed out to Gerasimov what he should do. He must now implement measures to protect Russia from such strikes from the United States and its allies. This, by the way, will help end the conflict in Ukraine and reduce the measure of bloodiness there as well. The reason is simple. If these countries get hit in the teeth, even if it's just drones being shot down, they will realize that they should not meddle in Ukraine, otherwise they risk facing consequences from Russia. Why are they getting involved in the war in the first place? What did Vučić say? NATO countries are only engaging in war with Russia because they believe the Russian elite will not respond to any aggression or damage inflicted by NATO countries on the Russian people, economy, or state. The lack of action by the General Staff confirms this perception. Apparently, Austin was not pleased with the conversation at all. Therefore, the U.S. government immediately made preparations for a retreat, with his press secretary promptly stating, "No, we're out of the picture. We're not going to send U.S. troops to fight in Ukraine." However, they hesitated for a day. Did they call Gerasimov, or what? Did they receive assurances from him before asserting their reconnaissance aircraft and drones flew and would fly, disregarding Russia's authority? This suggests that we need to establish authority. This implies that drones and reconnaissance aircraft should crash in the Black Sea. This is the only way to prevent a third world nuclear war. This is the only way to prevent a nuclear strike on Russia. And, as we see, Gerasimov is trying hard to ensure that a full-scale nuclear all-defeating strike is inflicted on Russia. You have already mentioned the release of Assange, which is the most resonant news in the world. Now Olga Sergeyevna and Alexanders ask you to comment on the recent release of Julian Assange. Who organized this release? What is it aimed at? And what are the consequences for global politics? Assange's project itself is certainly a supranational project.
поведение
Assange's behavior indicates that he was used blindly.
Да, человек убежденный в определенных
Indeed,
действиях.
he was dedicated to his cause, possessed the skills, and worked sincerely.
Так это и хорошо, когда работают.
So, that's good when people work sincerely and believe in the work they do.
Объемы секретной информации, опубликованной в WikiLeaks,
The volume of classified information that WikiLeaks has published is simply impossible to physically process immediately.
но ведь эти же объемы информации можно через WikiLeaks скачать необходимым различным службам, там, государственным инстанциям.
However, these volumes of information could be downloaded through WikiLeaks by various intelligence agencies and government authorities of different states, archived and used as needed.
Что в принципе-то,
This has been done in practice.
то есть практически все более-менее ответственные организации, даже если государство является какой-то колонией,
In other words, almost all more or less responsible organizations, even if the state is some kind of colony, have copied these archives and stored them for future use, using them to develop their state policies. They use this factual information as they study it because the volumes are huge.
И когда встал вопрос о том, что все, надо этот вопрос
When the question arose about the need for the project to be closed, the main leak had ended and it was necessary to draw attention to this information. Assange was subsequently arrested.
И вот когда нам говорят, что сейчас, вот когда Ассанжа освободили, Соединенные Штаты...
They tell us that now that Assange has been released, the United States has shown that its state jurisdiction reaches all countries. No.
Юрисдикция Соединенных Штатов распространялась на все страны ровно тогда, когда эти страны стали реагировать на требования Соединенных Штатов заткнуть рот Ассанжу.
The jurisdiction of the United States actually extended to all countries when they started complying with the United States demand to silence Assange and shut down the WikiLeaks project, leading Assange to hide from the persecution of the United States, as no state seemed to support him, taking refuge in the embassy of Ecuador, where he stayed for 7 years in a small apartment.
И вот обратите внимание, вот когда в 19 году Ассанжа вытаскивали из...
It should be noted that when Assange was taken out of his apartment in 2019, he was generally in poor health.
Он был располневший, причем нездорово располневший, одутловатый такой. Вот.
He was overweight, in an unhealthy way overweight, bloated, and it was evident that he had health issues.
Он просидел 5 лет в британской тюрьме. И посмотрите, какой он выходит. Он пришел в форму, он посвежел, он похудел.
After spending 5 years in a British prison, he left in remarkable shape. He had become fitter, fresher, lost weight, and his overall health had significantly improved compared to when he was removed from the Ecuadorian embassy.
А ведь он сопротивлялся, то есть он не знал, что его просто вытаскивают для того, чтобы его...
However, he resisted, not knowing that he was being removed for his own recovery, physical and mental rehabilitation, and further being used again.
И вот он заключает сделку с Соединенными Штатами.
So, he strikes a deal with the United States, where his time in a British prison is taken into account.
Ну вот интересно. А почему пребывание в иностранной тюрьме засчитывается в срок?
It's puzzling. How does time in a foreign prison count towards another state's term?
Ну, мало ли каким образом это государство, которое выдавало человека другому государству, его содержало. Оно могло его не содержать.
You never know the conditions under which he was kept by the state that extradited him. They could vary from being in prison to house arrest or signing an agreement not to leave. In the West, they simply take away your passport, and you will not be able to leave anywhere, among other possibilities. In fact, they have concealed him and ensured he had an opportunity to improve his health to some extent. Of course, full recovery would have been difficult, especially in those circumstances where he was being incarcerated. However, he left the British prison in much better physical and mental condition than when he was removed from the Ecuadorian embassy. The main point here is not Assange's identity or the nature of the project. What is important is that supranational governance is behind this project.
И вот юрисдикции Соединенных Штатов не хватило для Ассанжа для того, чтобы, когда он находился в британской тюрьме,
Moreover, while Assange was in a British prison or the Ecuadorian embassy, the United States jurisdiction was insufficient to shut down the WikiLeaks company and erase it from the information domain. Someone may ask, how is that possible? It's quite simple. How, for instance, was it possible with Russia? Take YouTube. Government resources were taken down, the president's resources were taken down, among other resources. In other words, any online resource can be removed without difficulty. It can be done quickly. And then, okay, Assange. What about the WikiLeaks employees who collaborated with him?
Что Соединенные Штаты про них забыли и не смогли организовать чего-либо такого, либо ареста.
Did the United States overlook them and fail to arrange for their arrest and extradition to the United States, or could it simply not eliminate them? Hillary Clinton has created a large backyard cemetery in the United States with people who have died in unusual circumstances. For example, someone who didn't know how to swim has drowned in a bathtub, and others who were unfamiliar with electrical appliances have been electrocuted while using a TV or other electrical devices, among many other instances. In the case of Boeing, whistleblowers who provided information to the court have met mysterious deaths. One recent case involved a suicide with 2 bullets found in the person's head. Well done indeed. 2 control shots in the head, just to be sure. That's some impressive shooting proficiency right there.
То есть, по сути, это показывает, что со всеми издержками по Ассанжу.
In essence, this indicates that all the history surrounding Assange's arrest was factually a marketing campaign for a specific purpose. The question that arises is, what was done? What kind of deal did the United States strike with Assange?
Сделка, по которой был удален весь архив, компрометирующий демократическую партию.
It was a deal in which the entire archive containing compromising information on the Democratic Party of the United States was erased, the same party that Biden is representing in the current election against Trump.
И говорят, ну все, вот все рухнуло.
The narrative goes, everything has crumbled. What now? The archive is gone. There's no other source of it. WikiLeaks has wiped it clean.
А я напомню, что все спецслужбы мира, так или иначе, ответственные за осуществление безопасности своего государства.
Let me remind you that all intelligence agencies worldwide, directly or indirectly responsible for their state security, have long ago downloaded and stored all this information, every bit of it. Not just intelligence agencies, but other interested authorities as well. Everything that was published on WikiLeaks is already on various electronic devices in different countries. There's a wealth of this information.
И вот здесь-то начинается самое печальное. Для той же самой демократической партии Соединенных Штатов и страновой элиты США вообще.
This is where the sad reality begins for the Democratic Party of the United States, particularly, and the U.S. national elite, in general, because any information published in the media and attributed to WikiLeaks cannot be verified.
Но если она поддерживается каким-либо авторитетом государственного органа,
if the information is supported by the authority of a government agency or an influential public leader claiming, yes, I have a powerful computer that I downloaded all the information onto. I've got it all. If WikiLeaks can have a computer to store vast amounts of information, why can't I? I have one too, and I use this information to leak it. It becomes unverifiable. But, in the process of exercising supranational governance, attempts by state actors to take action will be deactivated. They will not succeed as they lack the necessary resources. Only one state has the resources to resist supranational governance: Russia. She has not only material resources but also a unique cultural resource in the form of the Russian state system, expressed in Russian culture. This is why efforts are being made to destroy the Russian people. Recently, there was a scandal involving Pyakin. He said, well, do something to stop the state policy of genocide against the Russian people. He also referred to the State Duma as the state fool. Many deputies were offended by this. How can he say that? Did he really call us names? No, he did not call them names, so there is no need to lie or confuse the matter because he was actually criticizing the system. Even though deputies in their personal capacity may be well-intentioned, the system they find themselves in leads them to create harmful laws, which is comparable to committing suicide. This is why he referred to them as the state fool. By now, various bloggers have compiled a list of laws related to migration policy that were either not allowed for consideration in the State Duma or were not approved. Yes, there may be some issues with the laws that were not approved, possibly due to errors in their drafting. But if a significant number of laws addressing migration issues are consistently rejected, as if the problem does not exist, while the laws allowed for consideration are not adopted, then this is another question. When examining the list of these rejected laws, it becomes apparent that the State Duma is effectively engaging in a form of genocide against the Russian population by promoting the policy of replacing Russian people with foreign populations. This action is deliberate. But, by doing this, the State Duma is ultimately destroying itself. This is why Pyakin referred to them as the state's fools. What are you doing, fools? You are destroying yourselves. By destroying your country and your people, you are destroying yourselves. How will you escape from the sinking ship? What future awaits your children? That's what his point was. But we have digressed a bit. So, let's return to the main point. No state actor has the ability to challenge supranational governance or even simply the United States. Russia has this ability, as evidenced by her political actions. Even China, which seems to be the world's second superpower, must behave carefully. Without Russia, this second superpower is nothing, a fact that China is keenly aware of. Therefore, at this level, supranational governance will address this issue. If any blogger somewhere raises objections like, "This is not in WikiLeaks, it's falsified," here is the real document. I downloaded it. I know. They will either be eliminated in the worst-case scenario, slip on a banana peel, hit something, and die, or simply go unnoticed in the best case.
круга людей архив, можно осуществлять любые мероприятия надгосударственного уровня.
With such an archive closed to a wide range of people, it becomes possible to carry out any supranational measures to govern the United States, including influencing specific political figures through compromising material. Hello, obtained from WikiLeaks. Is it a problem to provide incriminating evidence? Do you think the State Department and Federal Bureau of Investigations don't have this compromising material, or what? Here it is. Either we release this information to the public, or you do as you are told. This is what was done.
Assange, который сейчас вышел на свободу, а его компания сказала о том, что мы будем продолжать эту деятельность, это означает, что
Consequently, Assange, who has been released, and his company, stating, "We will continue this activity," imply that the next phase of reformatting the world, particularly the United States, is approaching. The deletion of the archive on the Democratic Party indicates it.
Ну и другая, тоже резонансная новость в мире.
Well, another significant news story that you are asked to comment on is the long-awaited debate between Trump and Biden.
В частности, Велес спрашивает дебаты между Трампом и Байденом.
In particular, Velez asks, as you mentioned, Valeriy Viktorovich, deepfake technology was expected to be used during these debates, involving the substitution of images and voices. You said that Trump would have to agree to this deception first. Please share your thoughts on the debate that occurred and how it might impact the domestic political crisis in the United States. I did not state that deepfake technology would definitely be used. I mentioned it as one of the possible options among many.
Я говорил, что это только в том случае, если будет поддерживаться вот такой формат, который был в формате выборов 2016 года, 2019 там уже совсем другое.
I also emphasized that this would only occur if the format followed a similar format to the 2016 elections, which is different in 2019. In other words, if a certain level of decency would be maintained, then the process could involve a controlled and gradual reformatting of the United States. However, I reiterated that there are numerous other potential options to consider.
Особенно в последней, что мы же не знаем, почему вдруг ни с того ни с сего команда Байдена стала его подставлять. То, значит, посадит его так, чтобы ему было некомфортно со светом.
Lately, I have emphasized that we don't know why Biden's team has suddenly been setting him up in various ways, such as seating him uncomfortably under bright lights or ensuring he is not taken off stage unnoticed.
И это же много еще таких вот вариантов. То есть команда Байдена подставляла.
This suggests that Biden's team has been setting up Biden even before the debate.
Вопрос о самих дебатах, он состоял в том, если на них идет.
The question was raised about the debate. Would Biden attend it at all, given that he might not live to that time? Everybody understood perfectly that Biden would need medical assistance to perform, as his body has worn out.
Это означает, что организм у него изношен. И его, вот он мог бы еще долгое время быть вполне себе бодреньким старичком, как, например, Обама, и бегать нормально, если бы его не окунули.
He could have been a lively elderly man for a long time, like Obama, and able to go for a run normally if he had not been pushed into tough political confrontations at his age, leading to constant stress from the political campaign. They have already started to pump him with medications at this stage. Why was he constantly forced to go for running exercises at the beginning of his presidential term? To demonstrate his fitness. In contrast, they showed Obama on TV recently, saying, "Let's go for a run?" I'm going for a run. This is, so to speak, an indicator. Biden no longer goes for runs. Biden has been worn down to a nub.
Гораздо больше принес управлению тем же Соединенным Штатам. Потому что его опыт, его размеренный, соответственно, его возрасту.
If he had simply sat and intellectualized, he could have been more beneficial to the governance of the United States because his experience and leisurely, age-appropriate lifestyle could have enabled him to utilize his expertise and knowledge for effective governance of the state, and this state governance might very well have been conducted. Remember when Cristina Kirchner was elected in Argentina after her husband, Nestor, the president of Argentina, fell ill?
Там ведь как сказали, не надо думать, что она будет сама управлять государством. Вот, опытнейший политик, Нестор, который будет ей во всех...
They said, don't think that she would govern the state alone. Here is Nestor, an experienced politician who will instruct her on all state affairs. However, he will be in a normal condition, in a state of rest. He will think, govern, and provide advice to her, while she will handle exhausting public events and challenging procedures. If normal governance required Biden to govern the United States, he could have been put into a safe mode, similar to how Yeltsin worked with documents in Russia during his time. If he had become the most secretive president of the United States, meaning, to the press, no one would have known. He would have constantly given instructions, he would have constantly issued orders, and would not have to participate in public events. Then Biden wouldn't have to take half the year off for rest because he would be closed off to the press, working with documents instead of relaxing on a beach somewhere. However, even during his rest, they used to set him up, showing people that he was weak. The debates further demonstrated his weakness. But who arranged for Biden to participate in the debate? Trump agreed to the usual procedure of a fall debate. However, fall debates do not suit supranational governance as they do not allow for a certain maneuver we will discuss. It was necessary to showcase Biden's incapacity now and activate him in a specific way. The American national elites lack an understanding of state governance and operate based on their clan corporate interests. It is a mafia, similar to mafia structures present throughout the United States. There is no sense of unity, sobernost, in their governance. In contrast, Russian state culture values sobernost. Sobernost makes it impossible for the existence of mafia-like entities despite any accusations or slander. So Biden made it to the debate. Good. But who's to say he'll survive this debate? His tendency to fall into a stupor is worrying. After the debate, he was taken to a rally. What for? There, he once again appeared to be in a stupor, causing everyone alarm and anxiety. This means they are still trying to finish him off. The situation here is simply elementary.
Надгосударственное управление, глобальный предиктор, исходя из принципа, ах, вы не захотели реформирования по принципу, по мягкому, как через Трампа.
The supranational governance, the global predictor, is operating on the principle. So you didn't want reform to happen gently under Trump, where you, the superpower and global policeman, would transition into a regular state and eventually break apart into smaller states only to come back together. Very well then, you have chosen the most violent and bloody path towards the country's partition and all the chaos that will follow. As for the political elite of the United States, an interesting move was invented for them. What did Biden repeatedly say throughout his term? He is the only president who referred to his administration as the Biden-Harris administration, giving prominence to the vice president. Harris was initially being groomed to step in for Biden, but this was a personnel error. As Stalin once said to Comrade Polikarpov, "I have no other writers for you," indicating that there were no other options. For the same reason she was chosen. Harris is not ready to take on the role of president, just as Truman was unprepared to assume the role of President of the United States after Roosevelt. She is not ready, and betting on her would be risky, despite the fact that the figure of the President of the United States is a highly decorative one. Anyone who dares to say, "This is my presidential will," is destined for a sad fate. In the film, The Kingdom of Crooked Mirrors, King Yegupop VII tells Chancellor Nushrak, "This is my royal will." Nushrak then shows him portraits and says, "This is your ancestor." What happened to him? He was killed while hunting. And this one? He was poisoned. What about this one? He was deliberately drowned. Nushrak warns Yegupop, if you don't want to meet the same fate as your ancestors, never say, "This is my royal will." The same applies to the presidents of the United States. The presidents of the United States are always protégés of clan corporate groupings, the mafias. If a president is trying to carry out independent policy and is even achieving success, like Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times, they face elimination. Roosevelt was poisoned, and it is no longer a secret. Biden is the same hostage of supranational governance, rather than the mafia's hostage, whatever they might think. Now they are squabbling among themselves and have no candidates, which is why they were slipped Biden. The entire political beau monde of the United States has aged. In the USSR, some referred to the old age of the Soviet leadership as hearse races. In comparison, the competence of the Soviet leaders, who endured the Great Patriotic War and other hardships, far surpasses that of Biden and Trump. They were far more competent. Biden is no match for them in terms of competence, not even close. The crux of the matter is that there has always been an expectation that Harris would replace Biden and that he would exit quietly. Perhaps Biden ran for president because all along he thought, when I become president, I could step down due to health reasons and have Harris take over. But then Hunter Biden was hooked, which prevented Biden from voluntarily resigning. They are effectively guiding Hunter, leading to the inevitable outcome. But how are they doing this? Each political grouping acts to the extent of the power it has. Some groupings target Trump, while others focus on Hunter. But please note that in both cases, there is some understatement. There is a supranational power at play preventing these groupings from taking each other down prematurely. By going after Hunter and the Biden family, they made Biden unable to leave on his own if he wanted to because Harris wouldn't handle the job. Biden is now being pressured purposefully, and they even decided to declare him unfit using a constitutional amendment so that Harris can become president and appoint her own vice president. If Harris were to leave, and this option is also not excluded, an appointed and unelected vice president would gain full government power. Accordingly, he receives the opportunity to be elected president. A period of less than 6 months, 4 months remain until November, is enough for this. But the most important thing is that even if he remains in office as vice president, he can still address this issue effectively. That's why they were immediately enthusiastic about finding candidates. Who, what, why, and for what purpose. They quickly brought up Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan and were suggesting others. They mentioned that she is relatively young, at 50 years old, and has the support of Michelle Obama. But there is one specific candidate who has passed the examination in China. We discussed it on the Question and Answer program. This candidate is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. Although he currently lacks a starting position, if he is appointed by Kamala Harris as vice president and Harris herself is removed from office, he could potentially become president. Harris is aware that she lacks understanding of state matters and will not pretend for the position, especially since they are all puppets under control. She understands that she should not say, "This is my royal, presidential will," and will step into the shadows. She will be fulfilling ceremonial duties while Gavin Newsom holds executive power. This presents him with a significant opportunity to be elected president. You may be wondering why we previously discussed how supranational governance was preparing the United States for a worst-case scenario by activating the Biden option, and now I am mentioning the contemplation of Gavin Newsom's candidacy by them to address reformatting issues more gently. But that's exactly the point. The process will be violent. The question of the legitimacy of Biden's presidency is already a pressing one. The question of whether Biden will run again remains unresolved, with the possibility of him quickly reaching the required physical condition or, if he does not reach the required physical condition, being assisted in a manner similar to how they assisted Roosevelt. This outcome depends on the scenario that will be implemented, and why should we guess about it on the tea leaves? We are judging governance processes from the perspective of the general course of things, and we are witnessing this direction. The specific implementation, whether through Gavin Newsom, Biden, or Kamala Harris, is a technical detail. We are simply highlighting how these scenarios are being carried out. So, Gavin Newsom represents California. With California passing laws against Florida and Texas, the division in the country is already evident. Already, half of the United States population does not believe in the legitimacy of Biden's presidency, further deepening the divide and questioning the government's legitimacy. The potential scenario of an illegitimate vice president like Gavin Newsom coming into power would only exacerbate this division. This division in the country is being prepared, as evidenced by the release of 2 films about the Civil War. Therefore, Newsom's potential rise to power could intensify and accelerate this growing confrontation. In fact, in the upcoming November elections, 2 presidents will be elected, one for each country. With 50 states in the country, different maps are already being created to show how the United States will be divided. One option is 2 states within the territory of the United States, and another option has a significantly higher number of states. During the implementation of any project, there will inevitably be a chaotic scenario. I am presenting just one possibility involving Gavin Newsom. Another option to consider is the involvement of Gretchen Whitmer, which could be even more dire for this scenario but remains a possibility. There are other options as well.
В расчленение страны в гражданскую войну, это никаких сомнений нет. Иначе бы вот Байдена в таком варианте не выводили.
It is evident that the United States is being pushed towards division and civil unrest because otherwise, they wouldn't have brought Biden in his current state to the debate in June.
Потому что им нужно решить вопрос полной дискредитации власти тех кланово-корпоративных группировок.
He was brought to the debate to discredit the authorities and the clan corporate groupings behind him, who came to power through his election.
Они должны быть дискредитированы в глазах массы населения.
They need to be completely discredited in the eyes of the American people, leading to a complete split. The goal is to demonstrate, there he is, absolutely incapable. And you bet on him? Who is governing then? How is that possible in governing the country? Complete destruction is on the horizon.
Тот сценарий, который был использован для того, чтобы разрушить Советский Союз. Все эти легенды.
It must be acknowledged that the current scenario bears similarities to the events that led to the downfall of the Soviet Union, with legends like hearse races and the portrayal of leaders like Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev. This time, however, it is unfolding on the American platform, with its own unique specifics. For Russia, it was one specific situation, and for the United States, it is another. But look, the pattern of dismantling a state is being replicated in the United States, following the blueprint applied in the Soviet Union.
Наверху не должно быть дееспособного
A key aspect is the absence of a strong successor in power, with both Trump and Biden being older candidates. The question is, who is going to lead the country next? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, young and ambitious governors rose to power. Their governance in the newly formed states was disastrous, although they called it effective.
Или редактора журнала «Коммунист» Гайдара в главы правительства, это задача посложнее, нежели сделать из губернатора Соединенных.
However, appointing Gaidar, the editor of the magazine, Communist, as the head of government was a more challenging task than making the governor of California the president of some part of the United States that will be formed into a new state. This task is being carried out in the United States. It involves discrediting the current authorities and elevating candidates to key positions who will eventually govern over different pieces of a divided state. This divided state will be in a civil war that is currently being intentionally orchestrated. The debate effectively highlighted this situation. That's all the questions for today. Well, all I can do is say goodbye and remind you that many things are incomprehensible to us, not because our minds are weak, but because these things are not in the circle of our concepts. In the past, to become an active member of society, a person only needed to be able to read, write, and count. Now, to be an active member of society and protect one's interests in this turbulent sea of events, one needs to understand how complex social supersystems are governed.
Каждый на своем месте, занимаясь обыденной деятельностью, сможете работать на интересы государства.
By knowing this, each of you, in your respective roles, can work for the state's interests, stabilize it, and ensure a bright future for yourself and your children. To achieve this, you must become conceptually powerful, and for that, you need knowledge. Knowledge about the governance of complex social supersystems is only found in one source: the works of the internal predictor of the USSR. For the current strong maneuver in the conflict between Russia and the rest of the world, we have prepared and written a 3-volume book titled War State Bolshevism. The first volume, State, explores the concept of a state and questions whether all states are truly states. It delves into why certain states have specific capabilities while others do not, and discusses the concepts of an engineered state versus a historical state, among other topics. The second volume, War, examines different methods of warfare. It uses the example of the preparations for the First World War, how it was being prepared over 100 years, tracing back to events like the Patriotic War of 1812, and explores the global events that needed to be resolved for the war to occur in the manner it did. The third volume, Bolshevism, focuses on the unique Russian cultural phenomenon of Bolshevism, which historically played a crucial role in saving Russia. It emphasizes that Bolshevism, not mafias or fascism, was the force that saved Russia. Fascism has always sought to destroy Russia. And now, as they engage in these activities with the Ilyin Center, it is clearly an attempt to destroy Russia and its cultural identity. Ilyin himself acknowledged in 1948 that fascism cannot take root in Russia unless Russian culture is altered. For the past 30 years, they have been actively working to change Russian culture in order to impose fascism. However, their efforts have not succeeded in implanting fascism. This is why the fascists in power are enraged, as they betray the country and expose it to attacks from the Western coalition, hoping to seize power and subjugate the Russian people through oppression. Our partners have released a supplement in addition to the 3-volume book, War State Bolshevism, titled Fleet is Being, a volume of analytical notes. It aims to provide a more comprehensive understanding of these processes. However, it can also be used independently. For example, it discusses the Russian constitution, its structure, and delves into the role of the central bank. The central bank is currently engaged in various activities, and the supplement addresses other related issues as well. Our partners have also released an additional volume to the first and second editions of the 3-volume series. We are preparing a third edition, but the materials that will be included in the third edition have been published in a separate volume. This separate volume to the 3-volume, War State Bolshevism, can also be used as a standalone publication. There are also independent works included that can be read separately. In addition to the 3-volume book, War State Bolshevism, we have published the work, State Symbols and State Sovereignty, which discusses how one can determine the nature of a state, its capabilities, powers, and overall potential by examining its flag and state symbols.
Эта книга продается в Озоне, но в Озоне она продается странно. Они, имея в наличии эти книги на складе, очень как бы мелкими партиями пускают.
This book is available for purchase on Ozon. However, it is being sold in limited quantities and not in all regions of the country. We are working to address this issue. Ozon has assured us that they will resolve this matter, either by resuming full-scale sales or finding an alternative solution. In the meantime, those interested can either wait for sales to resume in their region on Ozon or purchase the book directly from the publishing house. Our partners, in response to the current difficult situation, continue to release volumes in the Library of Conceptual Knowledge series. The volume on economics has been released to understand how Russia's adversaries are harming the country and what the central bank is doing. Another volume on imitative and provocative activities has been published to assist in identifying individuals who pretend to be patriots but are actually enemies. This information will aid in distinguishing between the two. The volume, Sufficiently General Theory of Governance, has also been released, serving as the foundation of the conception of public safety. It is crucial to view all governance processes through the lens of the conception of public safety and a sufficiently general theory of governance. Additionally, the volume, Ah Yes, Pushkin, delves into the conceptual content of Pushkin's work, which is essential for understanding the next volume. Matrix is different from Matrix, focusing on matrix governance. Pushkin's work is closely tied to matrix governance, making these two volumes complementary. Therefore, read the works of the internal predictor to gain conceptual power and protect your interests and those of your family. By doing so, you can also protect the state, ensure peace, and secure a bright future for your children. Goodbye. May a peaceful sky be above your head. Happiness. See you next time.